Hey, what's up guys? In this video, we're going to be taking a look at a custom third-party international firmware that's available for the Uniden R7. Now, this international firmware, it's primarily designed for international drivers, especially in New Zealand, as well as throughout Europe. But there are a couple features here that are useful for those of us in North America as well. For example, you'll find an additional K-block options designed specifically to help you filter out BSM falses from different Mazda CX-5s, whether you're driving a CX-5 or you encounter other CX-5s on the road. Additionally, DC Fluid on the forums has been doing a bunch of testing with this update, and he's been finding that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, he gets better performance with the international firmware version than he does with the North American version, both on K-band and on KA. And then if you're driving internationally, of course, you can take advantage of all the other features that are available. Things like some additional speed camera capabilities, improved red flex detection, as well as some additional control over the different K-band scanning ranges available here in the Detector. Now, this firmware update, it's not created by Uniden. This is a third-party firmware update that's created by Mitharu, who posts on RDF. Additionally, this firmware update, it's not free. It is a paid firmware update. It retails for $65 in New Zealand dollars or $45 US. And then there's also some international GPS databases for different speed cameras and stuff that's available at an added cost as well. And if you'd like to purchase this firmware update, you can just hop on over to RDF and talk to Mitharu. Just shoot him a message. I'll post his information down in the video description, and you're going to be able to pick it up there. Now, two quick disclaimers here about this video. Number one, I generally do not test or review international detectors or international firmwares because things are so different overseas. And a lot of the stuff that you'll see here, it's designed for threats that we don't face here in North America, so there's no way for me to actually test and review the firmware. That said, there are some features that are available here in this firmware that are useful for those of us here in North America, and the feedback so far on the forums has been very good, and so I figured this is worth taking a quick look at. And then the second thing is I don't have any plans of doing any extensive testing with this firmware, and this is also not a review of the firmware. I literally installed it right before shooting this video, installed it for the first time, and I've just over the past couple months been reading up on it, looking over test results, talking to Mitharu, that kind of stuff. And so this video, it's not a review of the firmware update. It's literally just, hey, here's a thing. It's really cool. Here's some of the features that are available, and if you're interested and this applies to you, here's some additional information that you can find to go learn more. And on that note, if you're interested in learning more, I'm not the best person to talk to about it, so down in the video description, I'm going to link you to a bunch of different resources, so different test results, places to where you can go discuss the firmware. If you have any questions, hop on over there. If you want to purchase the firmware, head to the forums. If you need help updating the firmware, head to the forums. Installing this firmware will kind of lock down the Detector and make it a little bit harder to go back to the older previous North American firmware. And so if you need help unlocking the Detector to go back to North American firmware, again, head back to the forum. So that's going to be the place to go for learning and discussing all about this firmware file. This is just kind of a run through of some of the features that are available. And so with that said, let's go ahead and hop on over to the Detector and take a look at the different features that are available here in this international firmware version 1.38. Now, the firmware that we're going to be taking a look at today, this is firmware version 1.38 international. It's kind of an international spin on 1.37. So a lot of the same features, but with some changes and, well, some new features that are added on, plus a couple features that have been removed. Now, starting off, let's go ahead and fire up the Detector, and you'll notice that when it powers on, it says it's the international version, and then you'll see a couple other things. There's some anti-theft stuff built in. It tells you the owner, Vortex radar, and it also gives you an email address. Now, all this extra stuff that you saw here at startup, this is part of the anti-theft capabilities that are built into this firmware. And so it'll show things like the serial number of this specific detector. It'll show the owner of this detector, as well as an email address to where you or maybe somebody who finds this detector can actually reach out to that address and help get the detector back. Now, this firmware, it's tied to each specific detector and each specific serial number, and there's no easy way to actually unflash this firmware and go back to one that doesn't have the anti-theft stuff. It is more complicated, specifically designed in a way to, well, help prevent removing this anti-theft stuff. You can do it, but it is a little bit tricky to do. Now, DC Fluid on the forums has put together a lot of really nice tests and resources for you. Things like a list of all the different settings that are available here in this firmware update, kind of the different ones that are available in this one and what's been removed compared to the US one. And he's also spent a lot of time driving around with these different firmware updates. And he's got some good comparisons between 1.35, for example, the previous North American firmware, and international version 1.37, the previous version of this international firmware. Now, there are some changes, of course, now with both newer North American and international firmware, but that's a good comparison between North American and international firmware that you can check out. Now that said, let's go ahead and start diving into the firmware ourselves and take a look at all the different settings that are available, things that are different. So one of them, we've got things like your GPS connected announcement. You've got some more controls of customizing how that works or disabling it altogether. You've also got some additional speed camera features, so things like alerting to urban speed cameras. And then you'll notice there's also some additional filters built into things like adjusting the range of urban speed cameras, or maybe setting your urban speed camera quiet ride. Because there tends to be more false alerts with speed cameras in the cities, you've got some additional controls here. There's also controls for rural speed cameras in addition to the urban ones. So you've got some controls here for that. And then you can also do things like adjust the camera beeps if you want it to beep when you're passing, things like that. Then you got your red light cameras and also red light speed cameras. If the red light cameras also do speed enforcement, you've got independent control for those here too. POI pass chime, pretty nice if you want to get notified when you pass those or not. And also for things like in New Zealand, you can let you know now if you are in a bus lane or you're passing a bus lane where they have automated cameras for that. You've got this available here too. Now, the next cool feature is kind of some control over the different K-band scanning ranges. So you've got you can set your upper and lower bounds here for where it scans on K-band. So let's say you wanted your lower bound to scan from maybe 24 gigahertz up to 24.1 gigahertz. You can do that here, or you can start customizing it. This is essentially like having your own kind of manual version of K-wide, K-narrow, or K-extended, to where you can choose the frequency ranges to where the detector actually scans for. And you can choose maybe like a small segment of K-band to scan for. You can maybe notch out a certain frequency range. You can have a wide range or a narrow range, or just scan upper K-band or lower K-band. You basically have more control here of the different frequency ranges the detector is going to be scanning for. You can reference the release notes for all this kind of stuff and how it works, but basically the idea is if you drive in a country where officers only use K-band in a certain small, section of K-band, you can just kind of scan for only those ranges and cut out all the other frequency ranges to where you'd otherwise see only false alerts. Then as far as your K blocks, you've got 3 different K blocks here. So you've got your standard one for 24199, kind of your Hondas and Acuras. You've also got 24168. They'll show up in that frequency range too. And now we also have a third K block option, 24123 to 124. And you can customize, if the K block is off, if you just want to filter things out altogether, or filter out only the different weak signals. And this is designed specifically to help filter out false alerts from different Mazdas, like your Mazda CX-5s. This is a feature that's missing from the North American firmware version, and so if you want some additional filtering specifically for Mazdas, you've got this third K-block option that's available here in the international version of the R7 firmware. Next, we also have this user blocks option, which is kind of like a custom version of K-block that you can choose what it actually blocks. Now, the default frequency range that it filters out, I'll put here on screen. It's designed primarily to give you some additional filtering against different GM BSMs. Now, if you'd like to change this, or you'd like to customize a different frequency range that you've got here for the user K-block, it's not something that you can actually do yourself. You're just going to want to ask Mitharu when you go to purchase the firmware. Just tell him the frequency range that you'd like to have the user block, and he'll actually program it and set it up so it blocks that range for you. So that's how that works. And then with that user block, you can change whether it's disabled or enabled and blocking signals altogether, or just blocking weak signals. And then as far as all these different K-block options, you can have it either show the signal and have it grayed out on screen, or you can have it just hide the K-block signals altogether. Then as far as auto lockouts, you've got it here with 1.38 because it is kind of a modified version of 1.37, though there is a small change here with how auto lockouts work. With the international firmware, if you're using the different K-block options, the auto lockouts are not going to kick in for any signals in that frequency range, versus with the North American version, you are going to be getting lockouts in the different K-block frequency ranges, so a small difference there. And the same is true for the different K-limit frequency ranges that you choose. Now, speaking of GPS stuff, people online are actually basically creating their own kind of GPS databases for different speed cameras for different countries. Like, for example, people have helped create some for countries including Iceland, Finland, etc. Now, there's actually a bunch of different GPS databases for different speed cameras for different countries. The whole list I've got here, there's New Zealand, Australia, Canada, United States, all of Europe, Russia, China, Iceland, and Israel. So a bunch of different countries that they have these different GPS databases for. These databases typically are either free or they're going to be available for purchase. And the current price is $35 US or $50 in New Zealand dollars. Then as far as Quiet Ride, that's going to behave exactly the same here. The only difference is now you have an additional option for Quiet Ride on Ka band if you'd like low speed muting to also apply to Ka band. Then as far as a couple different features that are actually removed here from the international version that are available in the North American one, there's the rear K-band mute option that's not available here in the international version. Also the ability to adjust the rear balance and kind of independently control the front and rear K-band sensitivity, that's been removed. Apparently they're just kind of relying more on the different K-band filters instead of the rear balance option. The scan icon option, that's been removed from the international firmware, as well as the Quiet Ride low speed muting beep volume. You don't have the ability to control the low low speed muting beep volume independent of the rest of the detector volume. And then finally, as far as the pricing here for both the firmware update and the international GPS databases, if you want firmware 1.38 international, that's going to be $65 New Zealand or $45 US. The GPS database is freely available for US and Canada. You can download that for free. If you want one of the international GPS databases, that's available for purchase. It's going to be $50 New Zealand or $35 US. And then if you'd like to buy them both as a package, both firmware file and the international GPS database, that's going to be $100 New Zealand or $70 US. Plus, the purchase includes not only the current firmware or GPS database, but also future firmwares and GPS databases as well. Now, in the video description, I'm going to have a bunch more information, things like where you can contact Mithuru to purchase, all the discussion for this firmware update, different test results, all that information, things like that you'll find down there. Now, to update your detector, I did it just fine on my Mac. I just grabbed the Uniden update software. It was running 1.37. I grabbed the 1.38 firmware file, loaded it in, and it updated normally. Now, to update the firmware, you can do that on both Windows and Mac. To update the GPS database, you can do that on Windows and Mac. Though if you want to kind of go back to North American firmware, the anti-theft software does kind of lock down the detector, so you do need a special tool to unlock the detector, and that tool is only available for Windows. And so, yeah, that's just a quick run through here of firmware version 1.38 international compared to, well, I guess 1.37, the current North American version. The main advantages people seem to have, especially here in North America, are going to be the additional K-band filtering. It makes the detector quieter, helping to filter out maybe some GMs or Mazdas that you're not necessarily going to be able to do with the North American version of the R7. So that's pretty helpful. In testing, sometimes people are seeing some improved performance with the international version over the North American ones. Not always, but sometimes. So that can be a nice advantage too. And then, of course, if you're driving internationally, all the other speed camera stuff, improved red flex detection, all that kind of stuff, that's going to be a big advantage too. And so, yeah, that's a quick run through here of firmware 1.38. If you have any questions or you want to discuss it more or you want to learn more or purchase the firmware or upgrade or anything like that, all the information you need, all the links will be down in the video description, and that's where you can go, hop onto the forums and get all the answers you need to take the next steps. So, yeah, thanks so much. Hopefully this video has been helpful, and that's it for now. Hope you're all doing well, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.